I think that an important next step that is going to come sooner or later, and the sooner the better, is to change the law. Right now, the law in every state in the United States grants parents exemption from the crime of assault if they're hitting a child for purposes of correction and control. Now, I'm not in favor of arresting parents for spanking children. I don't believe in a punitive approach. I think the approach that is most likely to be effective and useful is the one taken in Scandinavia, starting in Sweden, where in 1979 they passed a law making spanking against Swedish national policy. It was not part of the criminal code. It's part of the civil code of the family law of Sweden. And the purpose of the law was not to punish parents, but to help parents. The purpose of the law was to provide funds for education, to let people know that first, even before that, to state a national standard that children should be brought up nonviolently without spanking. Second, to educate people about this, to let them know that this is now the standard. And third, to provide help for parents. So it's implicitly assumed in the Swedish law that when parents are spanking, it's not because they're bad people, it's because they're having trouble managing their child, and so they proceed to give them help in how to get the child to behave properly by non-violent means. The Swedish law has been very effective. The educative function of the law has worked tremendously. Sweden has gone from a big spanking country to one where people don't believe in it, and most don't do it anymore. It was in 1979, most of the public was opposed to this law, even though it passed Parliament. Now 75% or more are in favor of it. And the actual amount of spanking has gone way down. That doesn't mean it's completely eliminated, just like laws against murder haven't completely eliminated murder, but it sure helps to have a law against murder. And as the public comes to be, and especially through children, comes to be more and more familiar with this, it will accelerate the trend that's been going on away from violent child rearing. A law can lead the way non-punitively.
Many pediatricians have come to me and said, well, are you saying that we should have a law against people spanking their children? As though this were an outrageous idea. In fact, we have laws against adults hitting each other, don't we? We call that assault. And in fact, it is assault when parents hit their children. Also, we are actually behind the animal activists in many ways in asking people not to physically strike their children. Would a law help? Well, it helped in Sweden. In the beginning, most people in Sweden, in fact, did not support or would not have voted for the law against parents hitting their children. And while they were confused and disjointed for a while, we now know that over a period of a decade, since then, 2 decades actually, since Sweden made it a civil offense to hit your children, the abuse rate has actually dropped, and the rate of children going into foster care, which you might expect as a possible consequence if people couldn't adapt to a new way of thinking, has gone down to almost zero. The other thing about Sweden, which I think is very interesting, is that parents have learned other more positive strategies. That in observational studies in Sweden, there's been more negotiating between parents and their children, more use of reasoning, more use of praise. In other words, some of these more, you might say, more complicated strategies for influencing a child's behavior are things that people have been able to do in, that would really be just one generation or maybe a generation and a half. So should we ask any less of our own society to be able to do this? Well, pediatricians aren't going to be the ones that pass laws. So what we have so far from the Academy is a recommendation for pediatricians in the advice they give to parents. But now, speaking for myself, not for the American Academy of Pediatrics, I would say that laws seem to be the thing that actually help Americans start to approach more ideal behavior. In fact, we know this from seatbelt legislation. One of the most likely things to kill children was automobile accidents from children who were not restrained. And it was actually a personal friend of mine, Ken Roberts, who had a great deal to do with changing people's ideas to make it possible to have a law requiring seatbelt use and car seat use, has saved millions of children's lives as a result of that. And guess who was against that law in the beginning? The legislators, because they felt it was an infringement on family values, the ability to take your baby home from the hospital in your lap, the ability to be an individual. So it was that kind of anecdotal, historical evidence that got in the way for a long time. But now we know that we're actually saving many children's lives by having seatbelts and car seats be a requirement. You might say the same thing about civil rights legislation. If you waited until everybody agreed that that was the right thing to do, you would never have gotten civil rights legislation that would allow people to go towards that goal. So I don't think it's appropriate for us to be putting out harsh punishments to parents who do find themselves hitting their children, but that's not what they do in Sweden either. In fact, wouldn't it be better if we had such a law, but we also had the infrastructure to educate people so that when they've declared their difficulties as a result of the way they're punishing their children. So if we were to pass such a law that made it illegal or a civil offense for parents to hit their children as part of discipline, that the goal would really be to get those parents services, to get them education, to help them, and use that as a red flag, as a signal that in fact they're having some trouble with their children, and we should all gather together as a village to raise children. Hillary Rodham Clinton's book says a lot just in its title, which is, it takes a village to raise a child. And that's the way we should be acting towards children and families when it comes to discipline too, and that is we all need to be supportive of the effort it takes to do a good job raising children and be supportive not only in policy but also in the education and support we provide people. Now, when I say that there might be some value in having a law against hitting children, I know that many people feel frightened by the numbers of laws that impinge on family life. But in fact, our society already takes some responsibility for the education of children, for the health of children, and has rules about those things. And by having some kind of a law, what we would be doing would be putting forward a standard. It would be an educational measure to let people know this isn't good for your child. Riding in a car without a seatbelt is not good for your child, and we want you to take good care of your children. Your children are the riches of our country. Your children are the future of our country. And here's something you need to know, and that is hitting them is not going to help their development. There are many other ways in which the country supports the development of children, perhaps not as many as there should be. But looking upon children not only as individuals but as a resource might make all of this more palatable to our current way of thinking, is something that really is our business.